This is Videotech, this is Woody.
And this is Cheech.
And we are going to do a review for Metal Gear Rising. It's the first one of these we've done before. It's kind of a different style from most reviews. I have played Metal Gear Rising. I have played the hell out of it. I have gotten every single achievement. I got through the game on the hardest difficulty with all S ranks and everything. Did all the VR missions. I played through it like 5 times. And Chicho hasn't. So
I've watched one of Woody's videos.
So as Chicho has not played through the game, he is going to ask me questions about the game, and we are going to structure our review around those. So Chicho, what would you like to know about Metal Gear Rising?
Well, seeing as how I'm like representing all the noobs out there that have never played it, but I have gone in waist deep into the Metal Gear Solid series. I guess my first question would just be, what's the synopsis? Give me the Cliff Notes. Like, what would I read if this was a book and I flipped it over to the back? What would like the little short thing be about this game?
Well, it's 4 years after Metal Gear Solid 4. You are Raiden, who is completely cyborg again after Metal Gear Solid 4. And he's working with a security company now, and, like, after the events of Metal Gear Solid 4, the whole, like, war economy thing kind of fell off. But there's still a bunch of people working at it, and Raiden's, like, working with one of the good PMC companies, which is called Maverick. And you're defending this, like, super nice guy who got elected to this nation in Africa. He's, like, this awesome, kind prime minister. Everybody loves him. And in the first level, he gets kidnapped and killed. And you absolutely get your butt kicked by the guys who do so, which is a rival company called Desperado Enforcement. And a couple guys come along. They come along with a Metal Gear Ray. And that's your first boss you fight is a Metal Gear Ray. You fight him with a sword and you throw him over a building. And you fight them, you get your butt kicked, you get your arm chopped off, and then it picks up a few months later, where Raiden gets a newer cyborg body that is even cooler and more efficient, and he kind of goes on his crusade against them. And you end up sort of doing an unrelated job at first, but you kind of sort of connect the dots back to Desperado, and then you start fighting them, and the main bigwigs of Desperado kind of end up being like your quirky mini-boss squad that you fight the whole time.
Yeah, Raiden seems to have like a bad habit of getting his limbs cut off. I do like that they made Raiden cooler. So, let me think. Okay, so we're in the Metal Gear Solid universe 4 years after the first, or 4 years after Metal Gear Solid 4. So, how much Snake, or, okay, no, let's start over. How much Snake? How much Snake can a snake, if a snake could snake? Is there, like, a cameo by Solid Snake? Is there any reference to Solid Snake?
No, it's not about him at all. The only, like, reference they make to Snake at all is, like, 5 minutes at the beginning. Like, if you do a codec call at the beginning, because you can do codec calls in this, but in this they're completely, like, pointless. Okay. It's just kind of a holdover, like, series tradition. And, you can do a codec call early on, and they make, like, a couple references to Snake. Like, Raiden's like, oh, hey, I knew Solid Snake, and your codec guy's like, yeah, that guy's awesome, and that's pretty much it.
Okay, so really, Kojima's just trying to put the emphasis on Raiden.
Raiden. Well, Kojima actually, like, wasn't involved in this at all.
I thought he stepped in later on.
No.
Or no.
Kojima... No, actually you got it backwards. Yeah. Kojima, like, and his whole team, they were the ones making this originally. And, I don't know what kind of problems they had with it or something, but they eventually asked Platinum Games to make it. Platinum Games, they made, Bayonetta, they made Mad World, Anarchy Reigns, whole bunch of stuff that I really like a whole bunch. Made up of Clover, they were a development studio last gen, they did Okami, Devil May Cry, Beautiful Joe, bunch of stuff like that.
The little bit of gameplay I did watch, it was very reminiscent of Devil May Cry, Beautiful Joe.
Well, it's kind of like your standard character-driven action game. They have a few things that are reminiscent of like older Metal Gear Solid games, like the codec calls, like the stealth, but it really kind of ends up being more of a nod to Metal Gear, like, than it is actually any kind of relevance to Metal Gear Rising.
So how does the game feel? Is it like, is it pretty good as far as like a hack and slash? Because I mean, it is a genre, hack and slash, but does it feel like a cookie cutter style? Like, oh, this feels just like Devil May Cry, or does it really have its own feel?
No, it's actually a pretty unique game in terms of your character action game kind of style. I would say it maybe doesn't sort of hit like the holy trinity of like, it doesn't hit like the Devil May Cry 3, Bayonetta, and Ninja Gaiden levels, but it does a lot of its own unique stuff with how it works, and it really does kind of give it its own identity. The whole blade mode thing, which is at any time you can sort of pause and the game goes into bullet time / blade time, as they call it. You can sort of guide your sword around and cut stuff up, and there's a bunch of like puzzles and stuff. Well, not really puzzles, a bunch of fights that use that, where you have to like cut specific portions of people. And it's got a lot of, and I would say it kind of has its own identity. It's a bit limited in some aspects. They didn't have like a super long time to develop it. I think they only had like a year and a half to make it. And I think Platinum, they got some assets from Konami and Kojima's team, but like they kind of just had to like redo the game in that amount of time. So it's a little on the short side, and it's a little limited compared to other stuff. Like instead of getting like completely new weapons, there's a bunch of different swords that all have the same moves as your first sword, but like they have slightly different properties, like they're faster or they break through armor or something. And then you really, like, your side weapons, you really only have, like, 3 completely different weapons besides that, and they really don't blend with your main sword at all. It's just kind of, like, little gimmicky stuff. Like, there's one that you can use to, like, freeze people at long range. There's one that's, like, super, super high damage, but it's really, really slow. And it's just kind of typical stuff like that.
Right. Well, what would you say the replay value is of it? Is there like a new game plus, or is there other things
it's pretty
you
good.
can go after?
It's because like the main game is short, but that is where it is. It's very good. It has a lot of replay value. You get into it and you beat it once, and maybe takes about 10 hours total with all the cutscenes and everything. And after that, there's several more difficulties, because there's normal, hard, very hard, and Revengeance. Very Hard and Revengeance are kind of like the 2 top tier ones. Revengeance, everything's basically a one-hit kill, and so you have to be really careful. You have to really focus on, there's a parry system in the game, and you really have to master that to play that. There's VR missions, and those are the hardest VR missions ever in any Metal Gear game.
Really?
Yeah, I probably spent, there's 3 in particular, VR missions 17, 18, and 19. And I would probably say I spent more time beating those 3 collectively than I did my first time through the game. They're that hard.
Well, then I probably don't stand a chance with those VR missions, because I had a hard enough time with MGS1 VR missions. So, is it button mash, or is there like certain combos you can do, stacking up different hits and whatnot?
It's like all of these games kind of have some combo functionality. I would say Rising, it's kind of like halfway between a combo-based game and a non-combo-based game, because they have your sort of context sensitivity inputs, like when you trigger certain stuff, so it's like if you counter a move, then you can kill a guy instantly. And I would say it focuses more on that than it does, like, that's usually more rewarding in combat than just hacking guys up.
Okay.
And it kind of has a couple cool alternate, like, gameplay systems, like one of the things is, like, Zandatsuing is their term for it. But, in the game, like, all the enemies, the storyline justification is they have, like, healing units in their bodies, since all the enemies are cyborgs. Right. So, like, the story is that their spinal columns are, like, what naturally heal them, since they are cyborgs, since they don't have, like, normal healing capacity anymore. And what you can do in the game is that if you chop enemies in half, there's, like, a little target when you go into blade mode on each of them. You will open that up, and then if you tap B, you can Zandatsu them, which is ripping out their spinal columns and then absorbing their nanopaste. And that completely restores your health.
Nanopaste.
when you do that. So the idea there being is that it's kind of a cool system because it's like they can sort of challenge you more with enemies because it's like, oh, you fight a really hard guy, but then you can Zandatsu him and get all of your health back. So individual enemies are kind of like more powerful than they usually are in action games, like, and they are a bigger threat. Like one dude is a bigger threat, and I would say it kind of has a weird blend of like offense and defense because your only really defensive moves that you have a dodge. And then you have a parry. There is no block button. To block an attack, you have to parry it. And there's two kinds of parries. There's like the normal and to parry, you press like a direction and light attack at the same time towards where the attack is coming from. And if you get it perfectly, you'll counter it, which like leaves the other eye open. But if you don't get it perfectly, you just block like normal. But so it's kind of this weird like play style where it's like super, super offensive because you have to keep attacking and like ripping out people's spines to get more health, and you don't really have any defensive buttons, but then also like the best way to damage people is to counter them. So like high level gameplay, like if you play on Revengeance, like it's all about countering people. So it's kind of like, it's this really weird play style, and it's really nice to have that kind of a play style, and it is something very different. I would say it's not necessarily always ideal, because it's like, since its defense is directionally based, like if the camera's a little wonky, you can do a parry, and it's like the camera will mess you up.
Okay.
And
now, if you mess up on a parry, as far as pushing in the incorrect direction, do you end up receiving damage, or you just block like normal?
Oh, you get hit.
Okay.
Because, like, if a parry without, like, the perfect timing is a block, like, that's kind of what it's considered in the game, but you can't just, like, hold it down.
Right.
You can't, like, hold it down, and even dodge is kind of a weird function, too. Like, you have to press two buttons at once and a direction at the same time. It definitely takes some getting used to, and it's something different compared to other action games, and it's cool because of that, but at the same time, it kind of limits, like, the depth that it eventually ends up having. Like, Ninja Gaiden, Bayonetta, and Devil May Cry all, like, kind of have deeper and, I would say, like, more rewarding combat engines. And by the way, so everybody knows, when I say Devil May Cry, I am talking about old Devil May Cry, not new Devil May Cry.
Yeah, not Zac Efron Devil May Cry.
Important distinction.
Yeah, not 17 again Devil May Cry. That was retarded. Anyway, okay, so with defense being a lot different than what you're used to, would you say that the inability to just keep holding the block button, do you think that helps the flow of the game? Like, I would think it would cause the player to, like, always be on the move, always be on the aggressive, so that way the game doesn't grow stagnant. Right.
You pretty much are, because it's like I said, the game really kind of encourages you to be that aggressive, and since you can heal from everything that you kill, it's a lot more about, like, oh, I just have to kill people constantly to keep moving. It's not really a defensive option, because, like, a lot of enemies have guns in this, and you can get shot, and it barely does any damage. However, it's, like, still annoying, and it'll still, like, stun you. But if you're running, like, you have a move called Ninja Run, and it's kind of like automatic parkour. Like, as long as you're ninja running, you'll jump over obstacles and stuff. And as long as you're doing that, you automatically block any shots. So it's kind of like there is a lot of running around. And, like, running, making it over to a guy, killing him in a couple hits, like, sort of immediately judging which guy you need to go after next, who's the biggest threat, who you can most easily kill. And yeah, it's a fun game. It's a very different game than most traditional action games, but I really enjoy it.
So is there like a stamina gauge, some sort of limit break thing, or like a rage mode, or some sort of like execution thing once you get an enemy down to a certain amount of health?
Well, there's the Zandatsu, that's depending on the enemy. Sometimes you can just do it right when you start. Like the normal weak grunts, you can just go into blade mode and immediately slice them in half. And there are a couple other modes. Eventually, you get Ripper mode, and well, I'll back up a second. Because your blade mode, it runs off batteries, and whenever you Zandatsu somebody, you also refill all of your batteries too. And eventually, during the game, you unlock Ripper mode, which Ripper mode gives all of your like basic attacks the same properties that they have during blade mode. but it just uses, like, your batteries constantly while it's active. So it's like you can't really stay in it for long. It's kind of like your super mode. And aside from that, there are executions, like if you get the counters, you get a prompt to do an execution, and most of those usually end up with you being in, like, a perfect position to Zandatsu somebody right after you're done with them.
Okay. Would you say that combat is fairly cinematic too? Like, what would I give it reference to? Not like style, but you know how Prince of Persia, like a lot of the boss combat and stuff like that, it was more like you were watching it instead of engaging in it.
Yeah, no, it's definitely, there's definitely a lot of skill to it, and the bosses definitely have a lot of skill. I would say it's not necessarily a hard game, especially if you're on, like, the lower difficulties. Like, getting through normal is no problem at all. And it only really and it's like one of those things too, the game gives you a ton of health recovery items. Like, you can equip this game's version of rations, and you can carry 5 of them at once, and if you equip them, they just automatically revive you when you die. So you basically have 5 health bars if you get all those. And the game hands them out constantly. You get them before every major fight, but it does take skill, and what I would say compared to a lot of other games is it takes skill to do well. Like, it's pretty easy to just get through everything, but it's pretty hard to do really, really well.
It's hard to look impressive.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't even say looking impressive, because kind of, like, ironically enough, when you're trying to do really well, the best way to do really well is that because you're graded after every single fight. And the best way to do really well is to get a no damage bonus, which is not getting hit. And it's possible to get the highest rank in combat without getting that, but that's the easiest way to do it, because if you don't get the no damage bonus, you basically have to do everything else perfectly. And so it's like, because you get rated on several things. You get rated on, like, the time you took, your highest combo, how many people use Zandatsu'd, and then, like, a couple little other things. But then, like, and so most fights, like, between about 5,000 and 6,000 is S rank, and I believe no damage is, like, 2,000 points.
Oh, wow.
So it's kind of like, as long as you get no damage, you're pretty much in the clear. So it's kind of ironic, but a lot of the times, like, high-level gameplay, it looks impressive because you're not getting hit, but, like, it doesn't always look impressive from, like, just, oh, that looks cool standpoint, because it's like, the best strategy is a lot of the time something that looks really weird or really stupid to not take damage.
Right.
Like on a lot of boss fights, it's a better strategy to sort of arrange them in, like, if you know the phases of a boss fight, like, instead of fighting them down in other phases and, like, sort of doing the whole, like, trading blows thing, like, it's easier to just equip, like, a super powerful weapon and, like, time your hits with that, so that, like, you only need to hit them 2 or 3 times, but you do so much damage, like, you knock them through their different phases. Like, I can actually say, like, I'll relate this, and I'll be uploading this at some point soon, because I played through the game and I have recordings now for all of the game on Revengeance that I'm going to be uploading here. And, like, one of the bosses, towards the end of the game, I was trying to sort of make a cinematic fight. And it's really hard to make a cinematic fight with him, because the best way to deal damage to him is to counter him. So you counter him, and then you do, like, 70% of his life in one hit. So it's like, if I played it the easy way on Revengeance, I would kill him in, like, 30 seconds, and it would look really stupid. But then, if I didn't do that, the fight was then, conversely, incredibly difficult, because every time he hit me, he would kill me. So, there's this weird balance there. Then, it's not always perfect.
So you can't have your nanomachines and eat them, too.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've been saving that one for a while. So, in conclusion, would you say, like, this game was... Were there any points where you were a little bit disappointed because it didn't meet your criteria for Metal Gear stuff, or was it pretty exceptional?
I did really enjoy the game. It was different than what I thought it was initially going to be, and it's a really good action game, and it's like... It's good in the kind of, like, pomp and circumstance and totally awesome way, and they tried a lot of things with the gameplay, which I really like. It kind of reminds me of a game called... There's a game came out a couple years ago called El Shaddai, and it kind of reminds me of that, in that there are a lot of changes to kind of, like, the standard action game formula in there, and some of the changes aren't necessarily like great. They seem like they're there to be different and not necessarily because they're like original good ideas. That idea is my main complaint with Metal Gear Rising, where they only had a year and a half to make it, so I can kind of see why there's a lot of the problems that there are with it, since they were dealing with that short time span. I would really like to see them do another one and kind of like expand on it and make it better and flesh out some of the mechanics more. But it's still a really fun game as it is now, and it's still, you know, it's a little bit short the first time you go through it, but there's a ton of replayability, and it's got a deep enough combat engine, and it's engaging enough, and they're coming out with some good downloadable content too. I know there's already content out for 30 more VR missions. There's only 20 with the main game. Then they're going to have content to play as 2 of the different side characters, and they have their own little story and their own little boss fights and everything. So it's definitely a game I'd recommend playing.